covering the Utes better than anyone else. This is Ute Insider Steve Bartle of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Steve Bartle joining us on the program. You can see him streaming live just right along sandwich between the two of us on our stream. Steve, nice enough to join us and give some insight to this Utah basketball and some football stuff as well, because the offseason is getting shorter and shorter these days. Steve, first of all, welcome to the program, man. Good to see you.
Good to be back with you guys. It's been a minute.
I know. It's not that you haven't been working your tail off. The Utes are struggling on the basketball court. And Alex Jensen mentioned, like, hey, we're going to try to build this thing the right way. He mentioned Houston. He mentioned building it brick by brick. Where are they in that process, and what kind of recruits have you seen Alex Jensen landing or even having the conversation to be able to possibly get that makes you feel like, hey, they are turning things around, and it might be a slow process, but it's going?
Yeah, this has been an interesting season for Utah. Obviously, there's been, when Alex was initially hired back in March, there was a lot of excitement about, him taking over the Utah basketball program, given, his connection, his place in the program. And he's always maintained the bigger perspective when it comes to building the program, rebuilding the program. He didn't want to come into this and with the wrong expectations. He set the expectations, very early on that, he wanted to take his time to really build this the right way. And, he got a staff together, they put together the roster, and, there was a decent amount of optimism coming into the season that this could be, an interesting group. I don't think conversation around the program and sort of the expectations for what this year would be, I don't ever think that those got, too optimistic, too out of control. I think everybody kind of understood what this year was going to be. I had said that I felt like, Utah could challenge for, that 12-13 spot in the Big 12. And, unfortunately, with the injuries and some of the departures, guys leaving the program for personal reasons, Utah's roster took some pretty tough hits. Yeah. So this first year, it's been difficult because, there's two dynamics going on here with Utah basketball. You've got the fan base where you're starting to feel the apathy that really set in with the fans start to dissipate. You're starting to, hear from fans that want to hear more talk about the program, starting to show up to games and that sort of thing. And then, obviously the product on the floor this year hasn't been great, especially in conference play. It's been tough. It's been really tough sledding for Alex Jensen and the Utes. But a big part of that is the injuries and the guys that have left the program and just the limited options and limited depth that Alex has had this year. So, this first year was all about laying the foundation, figuring out what he wanted to emphasize as a coach, what he wanted to build his program with. And with Wes Wilcox serving as general manager, it's such an interesting role now in college basketball because, we've grown up with it where the coaches are the guys that get out on the road and evaluate and recruit. But now, with the general manager, especially one like Wes, who comes from the NBA and has a lot of relationships, he can get out on the road. And obviously there's still requirements that he's got to, adhere to in terms of how many days he can be out and that sort of thing. But, with his relationships and his experience being what it is, he can go out and he can evaluate. He can, hit the international waters. He can hit the high school ranks. He can do all of that while Alex and his staff continue to coach the team. So you've seen Utah put together a class so far, 6 players that come from high school. You've got a couple return missionaries. You've got a player coming from the Overtime Elite League, which is kind of a semi-professional league. You've got one coming from the JUCO ranks and another coming from the international waters. So it's kind of an interesting blend of players and where they come from, different backgrounds. And I think these players in this 2026 class sort of represent at least an idea, a better idea of what Alex is trying to build with this program. And obviously a lot of work is still to be done. It's the conversation is going to shift quickly here to player retention, who's coming back, and then obviously with the transfer portal, plenty of work to be done there as well.
A rebuild is painful in any sport you do it. And there was, you mentioned the expectations. I don't think they were very high at all. We all understood where they were at with this program and how much time it would take. But it's even more difficult, Steve, in the Big 12. This conference is insane. We're just watching BYU at this point where they're at with their roster and their progress. They're in the middle of the pack. To break through and beat the top teams in this league is extremely difficult. What is the model that Utah's following? What's the program they're looking out there and saying, that's a program that did what we're trying to do right now in a very, very good Power 4 conference? Is there some model out there that they're looking at? Or in conversations you've had with Alex Jensen and others, what's the model they're following?
Yeah, going back to, when Alex was initially hired, he made comments even then and has continued to throughout, the last 8 months or so, however long he's been on the job, almost a year now. Holy cow.
That's wild.
But he's consistently talked about Kelvin Sampson and this Houston basketball program, and that sort of being the model for what he's trying to build. And so obviously, Utah, BYU fans familiar with Houston, they just came through. They did, the Utah tour here just a couple weeks ago, beating both BYU and Utah. And Kelvin Sampson, one of the great coaches in college basketball, obviously leading Houston to a lot of success over the years, had a lot of really interesting things to say about Alex Jensen and sort of what he's heard of him, what he knows of Utah basketball, and talked a lot about, as you guys have kind of alluded to, building it brick by brick, right? Establishing your identity, the culture you want to build around. He talked about needing to figure out, do you want to be an offensive team? Do you want to be a defensive team? And building from there. And I think, this first year was about figuring that out for Alex. And I think with some of the players in the class, we kind of get a better idea of what he's trying to emphasize. There's going to be players coming into this, into the program from this 26 class that, offer higher levels of skill, at a number of different positions. Finn Scott, their most recent commitment from Austria, is a really skilled big man, something that they don't have on this roster. Jackson Johnson, the former Alta star, is returning from his mission, and he's going to be, a key factor for Alex in this rebuild. Jackson is a tremendous talent, a lot of skill for being a 6'9" wing, a great shooter. And I think that is going to be something that he emphasizes. He wants to continue to build this roster out defensively. I think that is something that he's going to continue to emphasize, is building it in sort of the same way that Houston has, where you really emphasize perimeter defense. You've got skill up and down the lineup. And I think that is really where Alex wants to, sort of take this program, is, having an offense that, everybody is at least a threat, can do multiple things at all five positions, and then a team that is bought in defensively. And I think that is going to be what Alex tries to build. And again, with the 6-man class and with the transfer portal looming, plenty of work to be done to continue to build that out. But with the 6-man group specifically, a lot of players that sort of fit that mold.
You brought up Wes Wilcox, who is the general manager. And it's an interesting model because we're all trying to get used to whatever that means. And the football team has every big program has general managers for football, general managers for basketball, whatever it might be. And Wes Wilcox is a great get because he's got a lot of front office NBA experience. I think that would translate into this, except for what is the role of a general manager for a basketball program in the 2026 era of college basketball? Like, you have to have them, but at the same time, like, Why is it? What is his specific role? Is it just figuring out the contract stuff, or what are some of the things? I mean, it was a month and a half or something into Alex Jensen's hire that they hired Wes Wilcox. Like, hey, this has to happen. Everybody else is doing it. We got to do the same thing. But what's the real impact that a guy like Wes Wilcox can have?
Yeah, Alex, his first hire was Coach Rafael Chilius, who brought the recruiting pedigree to Utah, and then his very next hire was Wes Wilcox. So his first two hires were two guys that really kind of played a key role in roster construction. And with Wes as general manager, that is, his big duty is roster construction, roster management. So that incorporates, evaluation, getting out and evaluating these players on film, in person, getting to know them. And then obviously with, the financial aspect of college athletics now, he's going to be handling the contract negotiations, the financials of everything. And then two, obviously we know that, where the game is at, and with the transfer portal being what it is, you constantly have to have communication both with your current players and with agents to have a feel for what's going to be available, how certain players are feeling, to get a gauge of what the market is going to be like. And so Wes can handle all of the roster construction dynamics of a college basketball program. That is his primary task, and why Alex wanted to bring him in, so that Alex could focus strictly on the relationships with the players, the coaching of basketball, and that sort of stuff. So everything when it comes to the roster, the construction, the management of all of it, that is what the general manager is tasked with doing. And with Wes, I know that he's been out on the road internationally evaluating prospects, probably visited Finn Shot, I think is what it is actually.
Mm-hmm.
And probably paid him a visit while he was out on the road. And so, that's his job, is to get out, to be the recruiter, to be the financial guy, and to be kind of the guy that has the sense of, what guys are thinking in terms of the transfer portal and all of that.
Switching gears to football, we had a conversation, I believe it was yesterday. We came across a list of the top 25 transfer portal moves of the offseason, and Utah was in the mix at number 25. As you look at what Utah did in the transfer portal, what transfer portal addition do you think is going to have the most impact in 2026?
Man, that's a great question, because it's a big, transfer portal class. But I think with where Morgan Scalley, has talked about wanting to be a little bit more aggressive, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, right, with where he wants to take this offense and sort of the emphasis that he is putting on the quarterback position. I think the two guys that they brought in at wide receiver, Braden Pagan and Kyrie Scholes, are the two guys that I would talk about the most here. And, it's easy because obviously Pagan, many consider him one of the top receivers in the class. Scholes, kind of a under the radar, sneaky good addition in the class. But these are two guys that not only have really good production to their name, but they have familiarity with Kevin McGivern's offense. And we saw how that could benefit players this past year who followed Jason Beck from New Mexico, obviously speaking to Devin Dampier, Nakari Rogers, and Ryan Davis. That's going to help Pagan and Scholes hit the ground running. And since with Utah bringing those two players in, it really is going to be interesting how they mesh together with what Utah is bringing back, because I do think, Utah's bringing back a couple of playmakers that, are going to be factors in this offense, with, Larry Simmons specifically being a guy that, I'm interested to see how this all melds together with Pagan, Scholes, and Simmons, because I think that could be a pretty dynamic three-headed monster at receiver with those three. How do they come, the chemistry, how does that come along with the quarterbacks? But I think those are the two guys, Pagan and Scholes, that I would peg as, the most important, the most valuable players that Utah brought in the transfer portal.
If you follow Steve Bartle, you can get the same type of updates that we do, which is, you go to KSLSports.com and you get yourself hooked up. He's got the pre the preseason, pre. It's always good to just we don't care how early it is, and give me like a roster projection all day long.
Yeah,
you know
put
what
it
I
in my
mean?
veins.
I love all that stuff. So you can go see all of those. What are some surprises people might see on the offensive or defensive side? And you covered both of them, obviously.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting, and obviously a lot of new names.
Yeah.
Right. I think a lot of new names to get familiar with, and I probably shouldn't have mentioned him in the last segment, but Larry Simmons is a guy that I think is going to continue to be a guy for Utah, productive player for Utah at that receiver spot. So Larry Simmons is one player to definitely monitor this offseason. Another name to know is Kelvin Obot, obviously the 5-star offensive tackle coming in from Fruitland High School in Idaho. Jordan Gross, his head coach there at Fruitland, is now the offensive line coach for Utah. And what does that look like? You've also got a few guys on the defense side of the ball that I think are really, really fascinating. So Elijah Reed, he's a cornerback that came in from Akron. Utah actually recruited him out of high school in the 2021 cycle. He ended up committing to Kentucky. That's where he's from, is Kentucky. He was a late bloomer that cycle. Utah was pushing hard for him, didn't get him. He entered the portal after, I think, 2 years at Kentucky, and Utah was in a really good spot with their cornerback room, so didn't really make a push for him. Now he enters the portal after 2 years starting at Akron, and Utah's finally able to bring him in. He's a guy with, he's 6'2", really long, really lanky, and that was kind of the point of emphasis for Utah in that secondary, was adding, cornerbacks, defensive backs that are bigger, longer, and a bit more disruptive, guys with production. James Chenault is another from USF. So they brought in 2 guys with experience, and suddenly, despite the departures that Utah's seen in the secondary, there's a lot of depth in that group with the players that they brought in and who they're bringing back. JC Hart, who I shouldn't say redshirted because he already redshirted previously in his career, but transferred to Utah last spring and essentially redshirted this year. But he's going to be a guy to keep tabs on at that cornerback spot. 6'2", 200 pounds, 4.3 speed. Coming from Auburn. So he's got the frame, the athleticism you love to see at that cornerback spot. I think he's going to be a guy to keep a close eye on, could really make that cornerback room really, really interesting this offseason. But those are probably the names that I'd single out with that offensive and defensive depth chart.
You can go check it out for yourself. He's got it posted right there, KSLSports.com. Steve always getting us the best information that we can get. And as soon as there's a pre anything, you let us know, Steve, because we want to pre-notify the listeners as well. So we appreciate it, man. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks, Steve.
We'll chat with you again soon here.
Appreciate you guys. Have a good one.
There you go, Steve Bartle.